The first time my wife called me needy, I actually apologized. That's the part I hate admitting now. Not because it made her stop. It didn't. Not because I had done anything wrong either. I hadn't. I apologized because when the person you love says you're asking for too much, some part of you immediately starts auditing your own pain, like maybe it really has become inconvenient. Maybe you did call twice too close together. Maybe you did ask one question too many. Maybe wanting your wife to answer a text without acting annoyed is somehow one step away from being controlling. That's how gaslighting works when it's done well. It doesn't just make you doubt the truth. It makes you doubt whether you deserve to notice it. My name's Adam. I'm 36, I live outside Columbus, and I work as an operations supervisor for a medical supply distributor. Long hours, early mornings, plenty of pressure, but steady work. The kind of job that teaches you to solve problems quickly because delays cost money and confusion spreads fast. I used to think that mindset helped me in marriage too. Speak clearly. Stay calm. Handle issues early before resentment gets bigger than the problem. That approach worked everywhere except at home. My wife, Vanessa, and I had been married for 8 years. No kids. Just the two of us in a narrow 2-story house with beige siding, a tiny backyard, and a kitchen that always felt a little too small for two people to move around in comfortably. In the beginning, that never mattered. She used to find ways to brush against me in tight spaces. Reach around me for a coffee mug and kiss my jaw on the way back. Lean into me while I was cooking. Touch me without needing a reason. Back then, she liked me. That sounds childish when you say it out loud, but it matters more than people admit. You can survive stress. You can survive bad months, bad work seasons, even dry spells if the basic liking is still there. What starts killing a marriage is when one person begins treating the other like their presence needs defending. That shift with Vanessa didn't happen overnight. At first it was easy to explain away. She got busier at work. She managed client relations for a boutique PR agency downtown, and every few months some new campaign or event would blow up her schedule. Late meetings. Last-minute dinners. Weekend networking. It all sounded plausible because parts of it were probably true. I never thought she was making her life up from scratch. That would have been easier to spot. No, what she did was use real stress as cover for a much uglier change. She got colder. Not in loud ways. She still remembered practical things. Still texted if she needed me to grab detergent or cat food on the way home. Still reminded me when her mother's birthday was coming up. Still asked if I'd paid the water bill. But the warmth around those interactions started disappearing. No softness. No real eye contact. No sense that talking to me gave her anything. It all felt administrative. The bedroom went first. That's usually where the truth shows up before people are willing to say it out loud. I'd get into bed, try something simple, a hand on her waist, a kiss on her shoulder, maybe just pulling her closer after a long day, and her whole body would go unavailable. Not dramatically. That would have almost felt more honest. No, she had this efficient way of shutting me out. A sigh. A shift of the hips. A muttered "not tonight" in the same tone you'd use to decline dessert. If I asked whether everything was okay, she'd say she was tired. If I asked a little too often, suddenly I was making it weird. That was her phrase. You're making it weird. At first I backed off because I didn't want to be that husband. The one who turns every night into a referendum on intimacy. But what happens when you back off long enough is you start noticing what else is changing in the silence. Vanessa became impossible to reach in small, specific ways. A text unanswered for hours during the evening when she said she was just home catching up. Calls sent to voicemail when she was supposedly running errands 5 minutes away. Messages marked read with no reply until the next morning, followed by some irritated explanation about how she can't be glued to her phone every second of the day. That line would have landed better if she weren't glued to her phone every second of the day around me. That contradiction was what started getting under my skin. She'd ignore my text asking whether she was still coming home for dinner, then sit on the couch beside me thumbing through Instagram like her hands were physically incapable of being still. I'd ask who she was messaging so much if she supposedly hated being on her phone, and she'd look at me like I had just accused her of a felony. Then came the labels. Needy first. Then insecure. Then controlling. Then paranoid. Always delivered with just enough weariness that the room tilted toward her version by default. She never sounded hysterical. That's what made it effective. She sounded exhausted by me. Like my questions were proof of some deeper defect in my character instead of a reaction to her increasingly strange behavior. One night in March, she was supposed to meet me at a restaurant near my office. Nothing fancy, just burgers and beer after I wrapped a late shift. We had made the plan that morning. At 6:30 I texted that I was there. No reply. At 6:45, I called. Straight to voicemail. At 7, I called again. Voicemail. She texted me at 7:18 saying she'd forgotten and gone out with co-workers instead, then added that I needed to stop blowing up her phone like a jealous teenager. I remember sitting alone in the booth with the server refilling my water and feeling something hot and humiliating move up my neck. Not just because she bailed. Because somehow I was now being scolded for trying to locate my own wife after she vanished from plans she made with me. When she got home that night, I asked how I was supposed to handle that differently. She kicked off her heels, tossed her purse on the counter, and said maybe I could start by not acting like every delay meant she was betraying me. Then she laughed a little and added that not everybody needs a babysitter just because they're married. I didn't accuse her of cheating that night. That's what still sticks with me. I wasn't even there yet. I was just confused. Hurt. Trying to understand why basic respect had become such a burden to her. But once she put the word betraying in the room, I noticed how quickly she wanted it there, like she needed to outrun something before I had even started chasing it. Over the next few weeks, the pattern got worse. If she went out and I asked when she thought she'd be home, I was monitoring her. If I asked why she didn't answer her phone, I was policing her. If I pointed out that she seemed to have endless time for friends, coworkers, and whatever was happening on that screen, but acted irritated the second I wanted a straight answer, I was making everything about myself. That was another favorite line. Not everything is about you, Adam. The crazy part was I started trying to phrase my questions more gently because I thought maybe tone was the problem. I'd keep my voice low. Ask once, not twice. Give her room. Use words like just wondering and no pressure. None of it mattered. The softer I got, the more comfortable she became treating me like a man whose concern was automatically suspicious. Then came the blocking. That changed the temperature of everything. It happened on a Friday evening in late April. Vanessa had told me she was going to dinner with a few women from her agency after a client wrap party downtown. Fine. I said have fun. Around 10:30 I texted asking if she needed me to leave the porch light on because sometimes she liked it on if she came home late. No answer. At 11, I called. Straight to voicemail. Not unusual enough yet. At 11:10, I called again because something about the silence felt off. Straight to voicemail. Then I opened our message thread and saw that my texts had gone from blue to green. I stared at the screen for a long time before I let myself name what that probably meant. My wife had blocked me. Not during a fight. Not after some huge blow-up. During a girls' dinner. Just because I asked whether she was coming home. When she walked in after midnight, I was waiting in the kitchen. I asked if she had blocked me. She didn't even look startled. She looked annoyed. Then she said she did it because I was being suffocating and she wanted one night where I didn't count her every move. That word hit hard. Suffocating. I asked how asking one question about when my wife was coming home had become suffocating. She took a bottle of water from the fridge, unscrewed the cap, and said this was exactly what she meant. That tone. That intensity. That need to turn every normal thing into an interrogation. Then she looked me dead in the face and said maybe the reason I was always so suspicious was because deep down I knew I was impossible to relax around. That was the moment something in me stopped reaching for innocence. Because by then, it wasn't just coldness anymore. It was strategy. Every simple question I asked came back sharpened. Every normal concern got repackaged as proof that I was unstable, needy, obsessive, controlling. And the harder she pushed that version of me, the more one thing became impossible not to notice. She wasn't trying to calm my fears. She was trying to punish me for having them. After that night, I stopped defending myself. Not in the big dramatic sense. I still went to work. Still answered when spoken to. Still took the trash out, paid the bills, fed the cat, did all the normal things men do when their life is cracking quietly and they're not ready to let the neighbors hear it. But I stopped chasing clarity from Vanessa. Stopped trying to phrase my questions in softer ways. Stopped giving her fresh chances to turn my concern into evidence against me. And once I stopped reacting, I started seeing more. That's what people don't tell you about gaslighting. It works best when you stay in motion, constantly explaining yourself, constantly trying to prove you're reasonable. The second you go still, the pattern gets easier to see. Vanessa noticed the silence before she noticed anything else. The next morning, she came into the kitchen in leggings and one of my old college sweatshirts, poured coffee, and glanced at me like she was waiting for the argument from the night before to still be hanging in the room. When it wasn't, she seemed thrown off for half a second. Then she asked if I was really going to sulk all weekend. I told her I wasn't sulking. She asked what I was doing then. I said I was making eggs. That irritated her more than if I'd snapped back. Because now there was nothing for her to push against. No tone. No accusation. No emotional mess she could point to and call proof that I was unstable. Just a husband at the stove acting like her words from the night before had finally done what they were designed to do. The quiet didn't last long. By Sunday, she was acting lighter. That was the first thing I noticed. Not warmer with me. Just lighter in herself. Like whatever pressure had been building between us eased the second I stopped asking where it came from. She spent a lot of the afternoon on her phone on the back patio, smiling down at the screen in those tiny private ways I had gotten too familiar with. When I stepped outside once to grab a drink from the cooler, she angled the phone away from me so quickly it looked automatic. Then she smiled and asked if I could pick up more sparkling water when I went to the store. That was Vanessa's way. Hide the knife, hand me a grocery list. On Monday, I started noticing timing. Her phone would get attention around lunchtime, then again between 5 and 6, then hard again after 10:30 at night. Not random scrolling. Not social media drift. Directed attention. Anticipation. Sometimes she'd be half listening to me from the couch while I talked about a warehouse issue or a vendor delay, then her screen would light up and the whole energy in her face would change. Softer. Brighter. Alive. I stopped commenting on it. Instead, I started remembering. Tuesday afternoon, she texted me around 4 saying she might stay out after work because a few people from the agency were grabbing drinks. The message itself was casual enough. What got me was how preemptive it felt. She wasn't inviting. She wasn't checking in. She was notifying me in advance so any reaction later could be categorized as control. I just wrote back, okay. She didn't answer after that until nearly midnight, when she came in smelling like citrus perfume and bar air. I was awake in bed, lamp off, watching the dark doorway fill with her outline. She moved quietly, which was new. Not guilty exactly. More careful than she usually needed to be. She set her phone on the dresser, changed in the bathroom, then picked the phone right back up before getting into bed. I rolled over and asked if she had a good time. She said yes. I asked who all went. That was a simple question. Clean. Normal. Married people normal. She went still for half a second, then sighed like I had asked her to produce receipts and witness statements. She listed 3 women from work, all names I knew, then added in a few others in that vague little way people do when the truth needs room to blur. I asked who the others were. She turned toward me then, eyes already hard. And there it was again. Not fear. Not confusion. Anger that I was still willing to notice. She said this was why she didn't tell me things. Because every answer just led to more questions. Because I could never let anything breathe. Because normal people were allowed to have coworkers and social lives without reporting every detail like they were checking in with parole. I said all I asked was who was there. We're just asking. Like the issue was the question instead of the pressure under it. Then she rolled away from me, phone lighting up in her hand a few seconds later. That word stuck. Controlling men. Plural. Not you're acting controlling. Controlling men. It sounded rehearsed. Borrowed. Like she'd used that language before, either in her head or out loud to someone else, enough times that it came naturally now. And once I noticed that, the rest of the night changed shape around it. The next evening, I got my first real break. I came home early because one of our outbound shipments got postponed, which freed up the back half of my day. Vanessa's car was already in the driveway. I walked in quietly and heard her in the dining room, voice low, almost playful. I couldn't make out every word from the entryway, but I heard enough to know she wasn't on some stiff corporate call. There was no work voice in it. No polished edge. No professional distance. Then I heard her laugh and say, "No, he's being weirdly calm now." I stopped walking. A second later, the chair scraped and the conversation cut off. When I stepped into the dining room, she was alone with her laptop open and her phone face down beside it. Her expression had reset too quickly to be natural. I asked who she was talking to. She said nobody. Just finishing up a voice note from Jenna at work. Jenna. Maybe. Maybe not. But what stayed with me wasn't the explanation. It was the sentence I heard right before she realized I was home. He's being weirdly calm now. That meant she had been talking about me. Not in passing. Not abstractly. Specifically enough that my change in behavior had become part of another conversation. The same behavior she had demanded from me, apparently, was now being monitored and reported elsewhere. I didn't push. I just nodded, grabbed a water, and let the lie sit there between us. That night, after she fell asleep, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling and replaying it. The blocking. The labels. The way every ordinary question came back with a diagnosis. The way my silence had suddenly become noteworthy enough to mention to somebody else. And slowly, for the first time, the whole thing stopped feeling random. Vanessa wasn't just defensive. She was managing risk. That was why the cruelty felt so sharp every time I got close to something real. Not because I was needy. Not because I was paranoid. Because each simple question brushed against something she was terrified I might actually uncover. By Wednesday morning, I wasn't asking myself whether my wife was being unfair anymore. I was asking who she needed so badly to paint me as the problem for. I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I was spinning out in the obvious way. No pacing. No staring at old photos. No dramatic late-night theories spiraling into worse ones. It was quieter than that. Worse in some ways. I lay there in the dark beside the woman who had spent months teaching me to question my own instincts, and for the first time I stopped asking whether I was overreacting. I started asking what exactly she was so afraid I'd figure out. That changed the whole shape of things. Before, every clue had hit me emotionally first. The blocking. The names she called me. The way she'd answer simple questions like I was trying to put her on trial. It all hurt, but it still lived in that messy middle ground where man can talk himself into being patient, into giving someone the benefit of every doubt they haven't earned. By Wednesday morning, that part of me was gone. I got up, made coffee, fed the cat, and acted normal. Vanessa came downstairs around 7:30, looked at me once like she was checking whether the weirdly calm version of me was still here, and relaxed when she saw I wasn't going to hand her a scene. She stood at the counter scrolling through her phone while the coffee brewed, bare legs, oversized shirt, one hand around the mug, the whole picture of casual domestic life. But even then, even half awake, she kept glancing down at the screen with that tiny hidden smile I had spent too long pretending not to see. Not big enough to accuse. Just intimate enough to tell on her. I asked if she wanted me to grab anything from the store after work. She said sparkling water and cat litter. That was it. No mention of the night before. No explanation for who she had been talking about me to. No flicker of concern that maybe her husband had overheard a sentence that should not have existed if everything in their marriage was normal. She wasn't trying to restore trust. She was counting on routine to bury suspicion. That confidence bothered me. Because confidence usually comes from rehearsal. At work that day, I kept replaying one detail from the dining room conversation: he's being weirdly calm now. That sentence implied history. It implied comparison. My behavior had changed enough for someone on the other end to notice and enough for Vanessa to report it. Which meant this was not some random flirtation just beginning to drift over a line. Whatever was happening, it had already been discussed enough that my reactions were part of the running commentary. I needed more than instinct after that. I needed shape. So on my lunch break, sitting in my truck behind the loading dock with a protein bar I never opened, I logged into our phone account. I'd avoided doing that for weeks because once you start checking call logs, something in you knows the marriage has crossed into different territory. But by then that line had already been crossed. I was just late to admitting it. The records weren't subtle. One number kept repeating. Not every single day. That would have been almost too easy. No, it showed up with the kind of rhythm that felt personal. Short calls during lunch. A few in the late afternoon. Longer ones after 10 at night. One 20-minute call the Thursday before she blocked me. Another at 11:16 p.m. on Monday, after I had already gone quiet enough for her to mention it to someone. I copied the number into my notes. Then I stared at it until the screen dimmed. There's something sickening about seeing betrayal reduced to digits. Just a phone number. No name. No context. But when those digits line up with the exact hours your wife treats you like an irritant and then comes alive in private, they stop looking neutral. They start feeling like a door you've been hearing close in another room for months without knowing where it led. I still didn't call it. Not yet. Because I knew how that would go if I moved too early. The number would get warned. Vanessa would lock everything down harder. The lies would get tidier. And somehow, if I confronted her without enough, she'd still find a way to make the real offense my method instead of her behavior. That night, I watched her more carefully than I ever had. Not obviously. Just enough. She came home around 6:40, later than usual, holding takeout and wearing that particular kind of tired expression she always brought in when she needed the evening to feel unquestionable. She set the bag on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and told me work had been a mess because one client kept changing event notes after approval. I nodded and asked if she wanted me to plate the food. She said yes, and for a second I saw it again, that little flicker of ease in her shoulders when I stayed easy. Not grateful ease. Tactical ease. The relief of a person whose cover remains undisturbed. During dinner, her phone buzzed twice. Both times, she checked it upside down in her lap. That detail mattered. Not on the table. Not in front of her. In her lap. A hidden angle for a normal message. I asked if work was still blowing up. She sighed and said, always, but the corners of her mouth had just softened in a way that made the answer feel fake before it even landed. Later that evening, while she showered, her phone was on the bathroom counter. I didn't go in there planning to look. I went because my razor was in the cabinet and I had left it there that morning. But the second I stepped into the doorway, the screen lit up. No message preview. Just a contact name. Chris. No last name. No emoji. No work label. Just Chris. I stopped cold. That was all I got before the screen dimmed again. But it was enough to send a hard current through my chest. Because by then, I knew what that meant. Not proof by itself, no. But it matched the rest too cleanly. The repeated number. The private conversations. The careful tone shifts. The way she had started sounding like she was quoting relationship language from somewhere else whenever she called me needy or controlling. Chris. A person with no label usually means one thing. A person who needs no explanation to the owner of the phone. I got my razor and left before she came out. That night in bed, I turned onto my side and waited. Around 10:50, her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. She checked it instantly. A minute later, she took the phone and went into the bathroom to take off her makeup, even though she had already done most of that at the sink earlier. She was in there 11 minutes. When she came back, she slid under the blankets and said she was exhausted. I asked, long day? She said, you have no idea. And I almost laughed, because in a twisted way, that was finally true. The next day, I took the investigation one step further. I texted my friend Joel. Joel and I went to high school together. We're not talk everyday close, but he's one of those guys who still knows half the city through sales work and golf outings and years of never really leaving town. More importantly, a few years back, he had briefly dated a woman who ended up working at Vanessa's agency. I didn't know if she was still there, but it was the closest thing I had to a human angle without tipping my hand. I kept the message vague. Asked if by any chance he still knew anyone at Brightwell PR. He called me 10 minutes later. I gave him the stripped-down version. Wife acting strange. A guy named Chris may be tied to her work. I wasn't looking for gossip, just context. Joel got quiet in that way men do when they realize the next sentence matters. Then he said there was a Chris who worked in brand partnerships for one of Brightwell's biggest hospitality clients. Not technically in the agency, but around a lot. At events. Launches. Dinners. Somebody Vanessa would absolutely know if she handled client relations. Then Joel said one more thing. He said he'd heard from his ex a while back that people at those agency-client overlaps always got messy because the lines blurred fast. Late nights. Drinks. People acting like work covered a whole second life. I thanked him and got off the phone. That should have felt like progress. Instead, it made my stomach drop. Because now the whole thing had edges. Chris was no longer just a name lighting up in a bathroom. He was a real man occupying real space in the parts of Vanessa's life she kept telling me not to be paranoid about. That Friday, things escalated. Vanessa texted in the afternoon saying she had an agency event after work and might be home late. Her exact wording was careful, don't wait up, it'll probably run long. No location. No who. No event name. 3 months earlier, I might have answered with a hard or have fun. Now all I saw was language designed to close doors before I could ask which one she was walking through. I wrote back, okay. Then I left work early. I parked half a block from Brightwell's office and waited. At 5:42, employees started spilling out in groups. Women in heels carrying laptops. Men in jackets loosening ties. Some headed toward the parking deck. Some toward bars and valet stands and the usual end-of-week city drift. At 5:49, Vanessa came out. And she wasn't alone. Chris was beside her. I knew it had to be him before I could prove it. Mid-30s maybe. Clean shave. Dark blazer. The kind of man who looked comfortable in places designed to impress other people. They weren't touching. That's the first thing my brain noticed, probably because some part of me still wanted one last technicality to hide behind. But they were too close. Walking in that easy side-by-side rhythm two people don't usually find on their first few professional interactions. She tilted her head up when he said something. He smiled. She smiled back, and there it was again, that soft, private version of her face I hadn't seen pointed at me in so long it almost looked stolen. Then, As they crossed toward the corner, he put his hand lightly at the small of her back to guide her past a curbside delivery truck. Too natural. Too familiar. Too quick to be accidental. I sat behind my windshield with both hands locked on the wheel, watching my wife move through the city with another man like he was the one she could relax around while I was the one she needed to call controlling just to survive her own guilt. And in that moment, the whole ugly thing finally clarified. Vanessa had not been calling me needy because I was wrong. She had been calling me needy because every simple question I asked came too close to the truth she was panicking to protect. I didn't get out of the truck. That's probably the part some people would judge first. They'd say if you see your wife walking that close to another man after months of being told you're paranoid, you don't sit there. You go over. You force the truth into the open right there on the sidewalk. Maybe some men do. But sitting behind that windshield, watching Chris guide Vanessa around a delivery truck like her body already made sense to his hand, all I felt was this cold, exhausted clarity that public confrontation would only help her. She had spent months turning my normal questions into pathology. If I marched up to them there, she'd do what she always did. She'd make my reaction the story. No. I was done giving her scenes she knew how to use. So I stayed in the truck and followed at a distance. They crossed to a rooftop bar attached to a hotel 2 blocks over. Not a huge place. Trendy enough to feel special. Private enough to look accidental if anybody asked. I parked where I could see the elevator lobby and waited, pulse steady in a way that almost scared me. I thought I'd feel angrier. Wilder. Instead I felt stripped down to something simple and hard. By then, I wasn't trying to figure out whether my wife was betraying me. I was trying to decide how much more of it I needed to see before there was nothing left to explain away. They were up there 43 minutes. Yes, I checked. At one point I almost left. Not because I doubted what I already knew, but because there's a limit to how long a man can sit alone in a truck while the woman he married goes somewhere she told him not to worry about. But then the elevator opened, and they came back down together. Vanessa was laughing. Not the dry social laugh she gave me when I said something harmless at dinner and she wanted me to stop trying. A real laugh. Head tilted slightly. Eyes bright. Alive. Chris said something as they stepped onto the sidewalk, and she touched his forearm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then they stopped near the valet stand. He leaned in first. She didn't hesitate. That was the reveal. Not the call logs. Not the blocked number. Not the gaslighting. Not even his hand at her back. That kiss ended every last generous lie I had told myself about stress, work culture, miscommunication, and my own supposed neediness. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't emotional drift. It wasn't some misunderstood work friendship poisoned by my insecurity. My wife had built another intimacy and called me controlling every time I got close enough to feel it. I let them separate before I moved. Chris headed toward the garage. Vanessa stayed near the curb for a second, checking her phone, probably already preparing whatever version of the evening she planned to bring home. Then she started walking toward her car. That was when I stepped out. She saw me halfway across the sidewalk. I'll remember that expression for a long time. Not guilt first. Shock. Like I had done something impossible by becoming real in the middle of a life she thought she was controlling. Her whole body stopped. The color changed in her face. For a second, all the labels she used on me, needy, controlling, paranoid, fell away, and what was left was plain panic. I didn't yell. I didn't even ask who he was. I just said, "So this is what I've been getting punished for noticing." That landed harder than anything louder would have. She opened her mouth, probably to start with the usual line, that it wasn't what it looked like, that I was making assumptions, that there was some context I didn't understand. But then she looked at my face and must have realized there was no room left for the old script. So she started crying. Evening, my wife cried like the consequences had come too soon for the story she was trying to manage. I asked how long. She said it had only recently become physical. Only. That word almost made me laugh. I asked again. This time she said a few months emotionally. A few weeks physically. She said Chris made her feel heard. Said things with us had felt tense and heavy for a long time. Said every conversation at home felt like pressure, and with him it felt easy. There it was. The real logic underneath all the cruelty. She hadn't called me needy because I was suffocating her. She called me needy because every normal question from a husband sounded heavier when she was already giving her lightness to someone else. She needed me to be too much so she could keep him feeling uncomplicated. I asked if that was why she blocked me. Why she ignored me. Why she twisted every simple question into proof that I was unstable. She looked away. That was answer enough. But after a second, she said she panicked every time I got too close. Said I noticed patterns she couldn't explain. Said if she made me the problem fast enough, she didn't have to deal with what she was doing. That was the most honest thing she said all night. Not because it made anything better. Because it named the strategy. All those months, I had been standing in my own marriage asking ordinary questions, and instead of reassuring me, she sharpened my concern into a flaw. Not to protect peace. To protect the affair. I asked one more question. I asked whether there had ever been a point, even once, where she knew I was right and still chose to make me feel crazy anyway. She cried harder after that, which told me more than the words did. Then she said yes. Quietly. Just yes. That was it. That was the moment the marriage ended for me, not the kiss. The kiss hurt. Of course it did. But the confession underneath it hurt worse. Knowing my wife had seen me standing at the edge of the truth again and again and chosen to shove me back with shame instead of step toward honesty. I told her to go home and pack a bag. She stared at me like she still thought there might be another round of talking where she could bend the story into something survivable. Maybe counseling. Maybe a trial separation. Maybe another conversation where my pain got turned into something we both needed to work on. There wasn't. I told her I'd speak to a lawyer on Monday. The aftermath was quieter than the months leading up to it. She stayed with her sister that week. Then longer. Chris disappeared as quickly as men like that usually do once secrecy stops making them feel special. There were legal meetings, account changes, awkward family explanations, and the long administrative death of a marriage that had already been emotionally rotting for a while. But the clearest part came fast. I was never too needy. I was never too controlling. I was never paranoid. I was a husband noticing the truth, and my wife needed me discredited before I could prove it.